Hello and welcome back. In my years on the bench, I've seen the very best and the absolute worst of humanity. I've witnessed moments of incredible grace and moments of profound evil. But there is one day, one specific case that haunts me in a way no other has. It's a story that fundamentally shook my faith in the justice system I swore to uphold, and at the same time, showed me a flicker of the most complicated, gut wrenching form of redemption I have ever witnessed. This is the story of a teenager who spent 15 years of his life in a maximum security prison for a crime he did not commit. 15 years. Think about that for a moment. Everything you've done for the last 15 years, the places you've been, the people you've loved, the milestones you've celebrated, for him, all of it was erased, replaced by the monotonous, brutal reality of life behind bars. And the most devastating part? The person who put him there, the person who held the truth all along, was his very best friend. And that best friend, 15 years later, walked into my courtroom and confessed everything. Before we dive into this, I want to ask you something. What is the biggest secret you've ever kept? And what would it take for you to finally reveal it? Let me know in the comments, because today's story is about a secret so heavy, it crushed two lives, and the moment it finally came into the light. To understand what happened in my courtroom, we have to go back 17 years. I wasn't the judge on the original case, but I've studied it extensively since. The crime itself was a tragedy born of youthful stupidity and desperation. A small, family-owned convenience store was robbed late one night. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, was closing up when a masked figure entered with a baseball bat, demanding the money from the register. There was a struggle. Mr. Henderson was shoved, fell, and hit his head. He wasn't killed, thank God, but he suffered a severe concussion and was never quite the same again. The robber, panicked, grabbed a handful of cash and fled into the night. The police were under immense pressure to solve the case. Mr. Henderson was a beloved member of the community. The local news was all over it. The investigation quickly zeroed in on two local teenagers, Kevin Johnson and Marcus Williams. They were 17, inseparable best friends from the wrong side of the tracks. They were good kids mostly, but they lived in a neighborhood where trouble had a way of finding you. They were known to the police for minor things, skipping school, a bit of shoplifting from the very store that was robbed, but nothing violent. It was the kind of petty crime that got them a talking to and a ride home, not a criminal record. But when a serious crime happens in a small community, the police look for the usual suspects. An anonymous tip, which we now know was called in by a rival from another neighborhood looking to settle a score, pointed the finger at them. And just like that, they went from being kids on the periphery to the prime suspect in a violent felony. Kevin Johnson was the one who was charged. Why him? Because the evidence, as flimsy as it was, all seemed to point his way. A witness, a woman who was parking her car down the street, said she saw a figure running from the store who had Kevin's build and was wearing a similar style jacket to one he owned. It was dark. She was far away, but in her mind, she was sure. Kevin also didn't have a solid alibi. He said he was at home, alone, watching a movie. It was the kind of alibi that's impossible to prove. Marcus, on the other hand, had an alibi. He was working a late shift at a fast food restaurant across town. His time card was punched. His manager confirmed it. He seemed to be in the clear. During questioning, Marcus was emotional. He told the police that Kevin had been talking about needing money, that he'd been acting strange. He never said Kevin did it, but he planted the seeds of suspicion. He painted a picture of his best friend as someone who was capable of this. He was the loyal friend, worried and scared. It was a masterful performance. Kevin was arrested. His family, hardworking people who lived paycheck to paycheck, couldn't afford a high-powered lawyer. They scraped together what they could, but it wasn't enough. So Kevin was represented by an overworked, under-resourced public defender. A good man, but one who was juggling dozens of other cases. The trial was short, brutally so. The prosecution presented the shaky eyewitness testimony and Marcus's subtle, damning statements about Kevin's desperation for money. They painted a picture of a young man on a dangerous path. The defense lawyer did his best, arguing passionately that the evidence was purely circumstantial. There was no physical evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, no stolen cash recovered, no bat. Nothing concrete to tie Kevin to the crime. But the jury, swayed by the emotional testimony of Mr. Henderson's wife and the confident, if mistaken, eyewitness, saw a troubled kid from a poor neighborhood and they made up their minds. They saw a stereotype, not a person. They found Kevin Johnson guilty of armed robbery and aggravated assault. He was 17 years old. The judge, citing the violence of the crime, sentenced him to 20 years in prison. 20 years. Kevin collapsed into his chair, weeping, looking over at his mother who was sobbing in the gallery. As they led him away, he screamed that he was innocent, that Marcus knew he was innocent. He begged his best friend to tell the truth, but Marcus just sat in the back of the courtroom, staring at the floor, a silent, devastating betrayal. No one listened to Kevin. The sound of the gavel was final. For 15 years, the system moved on. Kevin Johnson became inmate 7340. His youth evaporated under the harsh 24/7 fluorescent lights of a maximum security prison. The boy who loved to draw and play basketball was replaced by a man who learned to watch his back, to never show weakness, to survive in a world of violence and despair. He missed his high school graduation, his prom. He missed his mother's funeral, forced to grieve alone in his cell after being denied compassionate leave. He missed watching his little sister grow up, get married, and have kids of her own, nieces and nephews he had never met. He read books. He got his GED. He worked in the prison library. He did everything he could to keep his mind from breaking. He filed appeal after appeal from that library, handwritten on legal pads with the help of other jailhouse lawyers. But they were all denied. The system had spoken. The evidence, though circumstantial, had been deemed sufficient. He was, for all intents and purposes, forgotten. A closed case. A statistic. A ghost in a machine that had already moved on to its next victim. And Marcus Williams? He stayed in town. He got a job at a local garage, got married to his high school sweetheart, had a couple of kids. He lived a seemingly normal life. But it was a facade. As I would later learn, it was a life lived on a knife's edge. A life haunted by a ghost that was still breathing. He drank. He started with a beer after work, but soon it was a bottle of whiskey a night. He had nightmares, waking up screaming, drenched in sweat. He would see Kevin's face in crowds, hear his voice in the wind. He couldn't hold down a job for long. He'd get fired for drinking, for starting fights, for just not showing up. His marriage fell apart. His wife said he was a shell of the man she had married, distant and angry, lost in a private hell she couldn't understand. He was a man, drowning in a secret. And he was pulling everyone he loved down with him. And that's where I come in. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a day like any other. My docket was filled with the usual assortment of minor offenses. And then the bailiff called the next case, the People versus Marcus Williams, charged with petty theft. He had been caught stealing a bottle of whiskey from a liquor store. He stood before me, a man in his early 30s, but he looked 50. His eyes were hollow, his hands trembled. He looked broken. He was pleading guilty. This was a routine case, one that I would normally handle in 5 minutes. A fine, maybe some community service, and on to the next one. I asked him if he had anything to say before I passed sentence. It's a standard question. Most people say no, or they offer a brief, mumbled apology. But Marcus Williams just stood there, silent for a long moment. His eyes welled up with tears. His whole body started to shake. And then he opened his mouth, and the words that came out stopped the entire courtroom cold. "I did it," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "I did it. Not this, not the bottle. The other thing? The robbery. 15 years ago. It was me." There was a collective gasp in the courtroom. The prosecutor, the bailiff, the court reporter, we all just froze. I leaned forward. Mr. Williams, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What are you talking about? And then the dam broke. In a torrent of sobs and broken sentences, he confessed everything. He told us that it was him who had robbed the convenience store that night. He had been in debt to a drug dealer and was desperate. He had left work early, telling his manager he was sick. He had worn Kevin's jacket, which he had borrowed earlier that day. He had been the one to shove Mr. Henderson. He said he never meant to hurt him, that he had been terrified. After the robbery, he had gone back to work and punched back in, creating his alibi. He told us how he had watched, paralyzed by fear, as his best friend, his brother, was arrested and charged with his crime. He said the police had pressured him, suggesting that if he didn't cooperate, they might look at him harder. So he gave them just enough to steer them away from him and toward Kevin. He said he had tried to come forward so many times over the years, but fear, shame, and a desperate instinct for self-preservation had kept him silent. He had watched Kevin's family lose their home trying to pay for legal fees. He had seen the Free Kevin signs fade in the windows of the neighborhood, and he had lived with the crushing weight of it every single day. Why now, Mr. Williams? I asked him, my voice softer now. After all this time, why now? He looked up at me, his face a mask of pure agony. I can't carry it anymore, Your Honor, he said. It's too heavy. I see his face every time I close my eyes. I see his mother's face. I have kids of my own now, and I can't look at them without thinking about what I did to Kevin, what I let happen to him. I'd rather be in prison than in this hell I've made for myself. At least in prison, I'll deserve to be there. Kevin never did. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Marcus's weeping. I was stunned. In all my years, I had never seen anything like it. A spontaneous, unsolicited confession to a major felony in open court, 15 years after the fact. I immediately stopped the proceedings. The prosecutor was on his feet, objecting out of pure reflex, but I waved him down. This was no longer about a stolen bottle of whiskey. This was about something far, far bigger. I looked at the court reporter, her fingers frozen over her machine, her eyes wide. Did you get all of that? I asked her. She just nodded, speechless. I appointed a lawyer on the spot to represent Marcus, advising him not to say another word. I contacted the district attorney's office personally, and my next call was to the Innocence Project. The wheels of justice, which had been stuck in the mud for 15 years, began to turn again, slowly at first and then with gathering speed. The air in the courtroom was thick with the magnitude of what had just happened. We had all just witnessed a life being destroyed and another, perhaps, being reborn. What followed was a legal whirlwind. Marcus's confession was detailed and corroborated by facts that only the real perpetrator could have known. The original case file was reopened. The eyewitness from 17 years ago was re-interviewed. Shown a photo of Marcus from that time, she admitted she could no longer be sure. It could have been him. It was dark. She had been scared. The entire case against Kevin Johnson, built on a shaky foundation of circumstantial evidence, crumbled to dust. 2 months later, I was not on the bench, but in the gallery of another courtroom, watching as a different judge officially vacated Kevin Johnson's conviction. I saw him walk out of the courtroom, a free man for the first time since he was a teenager. He was 32 years old. He had walked into prison as a boy, and he walked out as a man with the lines of a hard life etched on his face. His sister was there, and they just held each other and cried. It was a moment of profound joy, but it was also deeply, deeply sad. How do you give someone back 15 years? The answer is you can't. And what about Marcus? He was charged with the robbery and assault and also with perjury. He pleaded guilty to everything. He didn't ask for leniency. At his sentencing, Kevin was there. He was asked if he wanted to make a victim impact statement. The entire courtroom held its breath. What would he say? What could he say? He had every right to scream, to rage, to demand that Marcus rot in a cell for the rest of his life. But he didn't. He stood up and he looked at the man who had once been his best friend, the man who had stolen 15 years of his life. And he said, "I forgive you." The words hung in the air, simple and yet monumental. He said that for years, hate was the only thing that kept him going. But he realized that if he held onto it, he would still be in prison, just one without bars. He said that he had to let it go to be truly free. He spoke of their childhood, of the bond they once shared, and he wept, not for the years he had lost, but for the friend he had lost. He said he hoped Marcus could find peace. It was the most extraordinary act of grace I have ever witnessed. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a light in the darkest of places. Marcus was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He's serving that time now. But this case has never left me. It's a stark reminder of how fragile our system of justice can be. It relies on people, on eyewitnesses who can be mistaken, on police who can be under pressure, on friends who can betray, and on judges who have to make decisions based on the evidence presented to them. When the evidence is flawed, the system fails. And the cost of that failure is measured in lost years, broken families, and a kind of soul crushing injustice that is almost impossible to comprehend. Wrongful convictions are not as rare as we'd like to think. The Innocence Project has used DNA evidence to exonerate hundreds of people, many of whom were on death row. But for every case with DNA, there are countless others like Kevin's, where there is no physical evidence to test, where the conviction rests solely on testimony. How many other innocent people are sitting in prison right now, forgotten by the world? It's a question that keeps me up at night. This story is a tragedy, but it is also a story about the enduring power of conscience. It took 15 years, but Marcus's guilt finally became a weight too heavy to bear. His confession was not a get out of jail free card. It was an act of self-immolation, a desperate attempt to cleanse a stain on his soul that had poisoned his entire life. It doesn't excuse what he did, not by a long shot, but it was, in the end, the only path to justice for his friend. So I ask you to think about this. What does justice for Kevin even look like? The state will compensate him financially for the years he lost, but no amount of money can buy back your youth. And what about justice for Marcus? He's in prison, but is that enough? What is a just punishment for a crime that was compounded by 15 years of silence? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for letting me share this story with you. It's a reminder that the pursuit of justice is a messy, imperfect, and deeply human endeavor. And sometimes the most profound truths can come from the most unexpected places, even from a broken man in a courtroom on a Tuesday afternoon. Be well, and I'll see you next time. This case is a perfect storm of everything that can go wrong in our justice system. It begins with tunnel vision, where investigators lock onto a suspect early on and then subconsciously fit all the evidence to that theory, ignoring anything that contradicts it. The anonymous tip, the shaky eyewitness ID, Marcus's subtle misdirection. It all created a narrative that was easy for the police and prosecutor to believe. Kevin fit the profile, so he must be guilty. Confirmation bias is a powerful and dangerous force in law enforcement, and Kevin was its victim. Then you have the issue of inadequate legal defense. Public defenders are some of the most dedicated, passionate lawyers I have ever met, but they are systematically underfunded and catastrophically overworked. When a lawyer is juggling 100 cases at once, how can they possibly give any single case the attention it deserves? How can they conduct a thorough investigation, interview every potential witness, and challenge every piece of the prosecution's evidence? They can't. They are forced to triage, to focus on the cases where they have the best chance of winning. Kevin's case, with an eyewitness and a supposed friend pointing the finger, probably didn't look like a winner. So, through no fault of his own, his lawyer was fighting with one hand tied behind his back. And finally, you have the fallibility of the jury itself. We put 12 ordinary citizens in a box. We present them with a carefully curated version of the facts, and we ask them to make a decision that will alter lives forever. They are told to be impartial, but they bring their own biases, experiences, and fears into that jury room. Did they see a young man, or did they see a young black man from a poor neighborhood and assume the worst? We can never know for sure, but we can't ignore the role that implicit bias plays in our justice system. The jury wanted to hold someone accountable for what happened to Mr. Henderson. Kevin was the person in the defendant's chair, so he became the target for that accountability. This story is a tragedy, but it is also a story about the enduring power of conscience. It took 15 years, but Marcus's guilt finally became a weight too heavy to bear. His confession was not a get out of jail free card. It was an act of self immolation, a desperate attempt to cleanse a stain on his soul that had poisoned his entire life. It doesn't excuse what he did, not by a long shot, but it was, in the end, the only path to justice for his friend. It raises a profound question. Can an act of profound betrayal be redeemed by an act of profound courage? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that Marcus's confession, as late as it was, did more to correct an injustice than the entire legal system had managed to do in 15 years. So I ask you to think about this. What does justice for Kevin even look like? The state will compensate him financially for the years he lost, but no amount of money can buy back your youth, your reputation, or your faith in the world. And what about justice for Marcus? He's in prison, but is that enough? What is it, just punishment for a crime that was compounded by 15 years of silence? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for letting me share this story with you. It's a reminder that the pursuit of justice is a messy, imperfect, and deeply human endeavor, and sometimes the most profound truths can come from the most unexpected places, even from a broken man in a courtroom on a Tuesday afternoon. Be well, and I'll see you next time.